So there were three factors that made sexuality difficult to integrate. One was the sheer danger of pregnancy for women, and then disease, and then the fact, well, the fact associated with that there were no contraceptives. Venereal disease was all the more dangerous because of the great spread of prostitution, and because prostitutes were almost invariably contaminated and therefore potential sources of infection. We can hardly imagine today how monstrous syphilis appeared to people of that time, made worse by the fact that it was likely to be transmitted to the next generation in the form of hereditary syphilis, which in turn had become a nightmarish myth and to which many physicians attributed all diseases of unknown origin. Well, and syphilis was and is a particularly problematic pathogen because it produces a massive range of symptoms. And so there's no telling what form it will necessarily take in one victim compared to another. So the Victorians had no shortage of reasons to be in serious conflict about sexuality. Now, Freud was also very much influenced by Nietzsche. Ellenberger says that psychoanalysis belongs to that unmasking trend, the search for hidden unconscious motivations characteristic of the 1880s and 1890s. In Freud, as in Nietzsche, words and deeds are viewed as manifestations of unconscious motivations, mainly of instincts and conflicts of instincts. For both men, the unconscious is the realm of the wild, brutish instincts that cannot find permissible outlets, derived from earlier stages of the individual and of mankind, and find expression in passion, dreams, and mental illness. Now, you know, it seems to me, and I don't know if it also seems to you, that these are sorts of things that we take for granted now, that people don't always say what they mean, that their speech and their actions are influenced by factors that they're not necessarily conscious of, that some of the drives or the motivational states that people, that are characteristic of people, influence the manner in which they speak, influence their dreams, and influence their actions in ways that are difficult to discover. And that passions and dreams and mental illnesses are manifestations of the unconscious. And so, you see, what happens to a thinker whose ideas are rapidly integrated into the culture, and that was the case with Freud, despite the fact that he said there was great resistance, and there was, but I mean the ideas that he put forth were integrated into Western culture during his lifetime, which is staggeringly fast from a historical perspective. I mean, when you absorb a great thinker's ideas and those become axioms now, they're what people assume, then all that's really left of what they think is what's the error, right? Because the errors, of course, don't become incorporated, and then the thinker just gets blamed for his errors. So, and that's certainly something that happened to Freud. Even the term id, which actually means it, originates from Nietzsche. The dynamic concept of mind with the notions of mental energy, quanta of latent or inhibited energy, or release of energy, or transfer from one drive to another, is also to be found in Nietzsche. Before Freud, Nietzsche conceived the mind as a system of drives that can collide or be fused into one another. In contrast to Freud, however, Nietzsche did not give prevalence to the sexual drive, whose importance he duly acknowledged, but to aggressive and self-destructive drives. Nietzsche also understood those processes that the Freudians called defense mechanisms, particularly sublimation. So, to sublimate something is to take a form of energy, like sexual energy, let's say, and pour it into something else. Now, the sublimation idea is a very interesting one because for Freud it was more of an individual issue. So he thought of sexual energy, libido, as a kind of, in some sense, a free energy. It was a source of energy that the psyche could use. And because it was, in some sense, a free source of energy, it could be channeled into other activities. And so, you know, one of the obvious examples of that would be paintings of nudes, for example. Or into creativity in general. And Freud actually believed that the reason that people became civilized was because we learned how to sublimate our instinctual energies into forms of activity and thought that were acceptable in the social community. Now, the funny thing about the idea of sublimation is that I think it actually works better as a phylogenetic hypothesis than as an ontogenetic hypothesis. So, and here's why. It is certainly the case that one of the reasons that people are creative, especially one of the reasons that men are creative, is because if a man is successfully creative and that makes him successful, the probability that he's going to have a wider choice of mates, or at least the possibility of what he might consider a higher quality mate, goes up immensely. And that's partly because women, unlike their closest biological relatives, which are the chimpanzees, are extremely selective maters. And women tend to mate across and up dominance hierarchies. And this looks like a biological propensity. It's the case for women all around the world. It's also, as far as we can tell, the source of the rapid expansion of human creative ability and intelligence. It's true just as much in egalitarian societies as it is in societies that are extremely unequal. And it's also one of the major causes now of income inequality. Because one of the things that's happened is that as women have become educated, like educated men will marry uneducated women, but educated women will not marry uneducated men. And so what's happened as we've transformed our society increasingly into an intellectual meritocracy that also allows the contribution of conscientiousness is that we're getting a sortative mating between smart and conscientious people at the upper strata of the socioeconomic distribution. And the estimates now are that about 25% of income inequality in North America is a consequence of the fact that women will only mate across or up dominance hierarchies. So they're looking for someone who's at least as competent as they are or more competent. So, depending of course on what you mean by competent. Whereas men are not. The correlation between women's socioeconomic status and their mating opportunity is slightly negative. The correlation between men's socioeconomic status and their mating potential, so to speak, is about 0.5, 0.6. Like, that's a massive difference. It's an unbelievably massive difference. It has very powerful sociological consequences.